to Women's Sports Weekly, where women's sports happens every day, but we talk about it once a week. I'm Carolyn.
And I'm Danielle. Women's Sports Weekly is a podcast where we discuss the latest news, explore interesting stories, and share our love for women's sports. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Follow us and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. All right, Carolyn, kicking off today's episode, we can dive right into the highlight reel. I'm going to kick us off with some lacrosse. I've been on a lacrosse kick lately, so only seems right. And just as a reminder, NCAA lacrosse tournament started this weekend. Games, we are recording on Sunday, and games are going on as we speak, so be sure to tune in. The highlight I wanted to go over this week is 6-year student from Northwestern University, Izzy Scane, just broke the NCAA all-time goals record. She's originally from Michigan, and I was looking at her stats online. She has a laundry list of awards throughout her collegiate career, one of them being MVP of last year's national championship. Northwestern won in 2023. This year, they are trying for another national championship.
Izzy Scane is the Caitlin Clark of lacrosse.
Correct. She broke the Division I record for women's lacrosse goals. The amount of goals is 359. That was what it took to break the record in 81 games. And this happened in the first period of the game that took place on Sunday against Denver University. The original record holder prior to Sunday was Charlotte North. North had 358 goals in 87 games for Boston College and Duke from 2018 to 2022. So that was also a recent record that she broke.
So Izzy Scane did it in less games. Less games against University of Denver.
Correct. So shout out to Izzy Scane, and let's see how far they can get in the tournament. What do you have for us this week?
I want to talk about softball. So all the conference tournaments happened this past weekend, and I just want to go over the Power 5 results. So in the ACC, Duke, the number 1 seed, beat number 2, Florida State. Duke is on a run right now where they could be an underdog. Well, they're not even an underdog because they're so good. They were ranked number 1 at some point in the season. They've had some tough losses since then. If they hit a stride right now, I would be really excited, really happy for them to make it to the Women's College World Series. We'll see how it plays out in regionals and super regionals, but I think they can make a run. This past weekend, there were not a lot of number 1 seeds that won in the conferences. The only other number 1 seed came out of the Pac-12. UCLA number 1 beat number 6 seed Utah. There were upsets all over the place in this past week. There were so many extra inning games. In the SEC, they had 2 14-inning games back-to-back. In the Big Ten, Michigan, number 2 seed, beat number 8 seed Indiana. Again, number 1 seed was knocked out. In the Big 12, Oklahoma, which was the number 2 seed, which is weird to have Oklahoma as a number 2 seed.
They're usually number 1.
Exactly. But they beat number 1 seed Texas, and Texas had recently beat Oklahoma.
It sounds like a little bit of May Madness this month.
Madness. That is right.
Happening in softball. Very exciting.
In the SEC, Florida, the number 2 seed, beat number 5 seed Missouri. So just madness all around. The NCAA regionals begin on Thursday, May 16th and run through May 19th, with the super regionals set for May 23rd to the 25th or 26th. And then the Women's College World Series starts on May 30th. So the May Madness continues.
Yes, really looking forward to College World Series. Every year it's so exciting. And I just love that they refer to it as the World Series. Like, I just feel like it's a different tone and brings a little more excitement around it.
Every year, my sister and I say that we're going to go to the Women's College World Series.
We have to make it happen one year.
We do need to make it happen. Such a great environment. So many people watching. So many great games. This past week alone, the amount of great games, the amount of games that were going into extra innings, it's just revving up for what is going to be a really great road to the Women's College World Series. So I'm excited for that.
The other thing we wanted to talk through today was Full Court Press finally came out on ABC and ESPN Plus. This is sort of like a docuseries around 3 top collegiate basketball players from the women's game. And if anyone has seen Quarterback on Netflix, it's very similar to that.
Or it gives me vibes of Breaking Point or the F1 series on
Yeah.
Netflix. A deep dive into the players' personalities, into the environment that they're in. I thought it was really, really well done.
It's been raining in Denver, which is pretty unusual, but it's allowed us to sit down and just binge watch the series, which I really appreciate because I feel like we're always on the go. So to have some time to just sit there for a few hours and really dive into this has been very enjoyable.
What was your favorite thing that you learned or that you noticed while watching?
Yes. Well, first, want to say the 3 players that are
Yes.
on this are Kamilla Cardoso from South Carolina, Caitlin Clark from Iowa, and Kiki Rice from UCLA. The most interesting story for me is Kamilla Cardoso. And I don't even want to use the word interesting. I think it's more eye-opening is the word I want to use, because I don't think people realize the struggle that some players need to go through. And this game is so much more than a game to her. It's
her
a means,
livelihood.
Yeah. It's
And
a
her
means to help her mother,
Exactly.
her sister, just learning about the area of Brazil she came from. And her mother works a spice stand in the streets in Brazil, and talking about the struggles of that. And Kamilla left her family at age 14. That was really eye-opening for me. How about you?
Definitely Camilla's story. The other thing was seeing just the amount of pressure and attention that Caitlin Clark, and we all know it, she just had to carry this heavy load. I just can't imagine everyone having an opinion about me. That must be really, really difficult.
Good, bad, ugly, like
Yes.
so many things that she dives into in different stories, and people were talking about conspiracy theories and just like crazy stuff.
And I also really liked the highlight on Kiki Rice.
Yes.
And I really appreciated that they talked a lot about mental health, talked about her confidence and how she works with a sports psychologist. I think it's so important to show everyone that sometimes you need that extra help. And it's so normal to need help with your mental health.
I did not work with a sports psychologist in college, and I know we're going to talk about this a lot today. I wish I could have had that because I think it would have helped me tremendously. So that was definitely, I agree, to highlight that was very important. Kiki Rice is not one of the biggest names, I would say. I would vouch to say that a lot of people knew Kamilla Cardoso, obviously Caitlin Clark. So it was nice to learn more about Kiki Rice coming from the Pac-12, which we've said all year.
They don't get any
the
coverage.
TV coverage. To be able to dive into what her life looks like and what she's trying to accomplish in her college career, only just finishing her sophomore season. She has more to come in the college world. So I thought it was very cool to see that aspect as well.
So if you have not seen Full Court Press yet, we highly recommend it.
Yes, the production of it was really, really well done.
And that actually brings us into our deep dive topic for today. So that set us up perfectly well. So we are going to talk about mental health in sports today. We are going to talk about it from a women's sports angle. Mental health can feel sometimes to people like a touchy subject. So we want to make sure that we're upfront at the top. We will be talking about topics that cover suicide and sexual abuse and eating disorders. So if you aren't wanting to hear about these topics, you can feel free to skip to the end when we talk about what we're looking forward to this week. We really want to just make sure that our listeners take care of themselves.
Yes, for sure.
So let's get into it. Everyone has mental health. And although we are talking about athletes in this realm, I think this applies to every single human. So you don't need to be a former college athlete to be part of this conversation. Every single person has mental health. Everyone's mental health needs to be cared for. Let's go through some of the facts. You know, I love my facts.
Yes, let's hear what you learned.
Rates of anxiety and depression are high among females in general, and then high among female athletes in general. Female athletes report higher rates of anxiety and depression than their male athlete counterparts. The NCAA's own survey of 9,800 athletes in 2021 showed that 38% of women reported feeling mentally exhausted compared with 22% of men.
Wow.
The same study indicated 6% of males and 10% of females said they felt hopeless. That stuck out to me. That stat is low, 6% for males, 10% of females. But to feel hopeless is such a strong word to me, that you have no hope. You're not looking forward to anything. Even one person saying that is one too many. And to have 10% of females say that, I was just like, wow. Within the female population, single sport athletes are at greatest risk of anxiety and depression. So single sport athletes, meaning that you do it on your own. So for example, track and field or tennis, right, where you don't have a teammate, they are experiencing higher risk of anxiety and depression. Being a member of a sports team positively affects the experience of recovering from an injury and lower rates of anxiety and depression.
Sense.
The other thing that I think we've talked about before is this pairing with injury, like I mentioned. So female athletes who were anxious sustained sports-related injuries at a rate that was 1.9 times higher than that found of female athletes who did not report anxiety symptoms. And these are correlations. This is not causation, but it's like a little bit of the chicken or the egg. If you're anxious, you're more likely to be injured. And then if you're injured, you're also more likely to be anxious.
When I'm really stressed for longer periods of time, and in my adult life, it might be from work or just personal things, and I feel that in my workouts. And Alexi Pappas, she was a professional runner. She still runs.
Olympian.
Yes, former Olympian. Thank you. I read her book, Bravey, and she talks about something very little can come up in your body. You have to be so aware. It could be a pimple you don't normally get or inflamed lymph node. I know that happens to me sometimes. Be careful in those moments because you're more likely to get injured in those moments. And you have to think through like what's happening in my life right now that's causing this stress to take care of the injury aspects.
It's hard though, because to have body awareness, that took me years to figure out.
Yeah, I did not have that in college. 1 ounce.
And we're going to talk about a little bit about our experiences, but there are signs there. And for me, my signs are if I'm biting my nails a lot, I know something's happening. If I'm having a breakout on my face, it's not just a breakout on my face. It's usually because I'm stressed about something or my hormones are super unregulated. And so these are all signs. Do we prep our young people and especially our young female athletes to identify what that could be and where do I need to take a step back and how do I care for myself?
Did anyone ever tell you that? Like what to look for or it was kind of just like, come on, keep it moving and next thing and can't slow down.
Especially among girls and women athletes, there is this really high struggle with body image and eating disorders that are at a higher rate than their male counterparts. So according to some studies, they found that up to 45% of female athletes have experienced an eating disorder.
This is not surprising to me at all.
So high.
I know. And I think things have probably gotten better now for college athletes because with the internet and social media and more awareness around these things, I don't even know what year of college I was in. Lifting, for example, we were told as women that we shouldn't lift because we're going to become bulky or you can't eat certain things because you're going to become fat. So it's everything surrounding us was telling us you can't do this, you can't do that. So in our focus as female athletes, it was more how do I stay thin versus what am I going to eat that's going to help me perform? What lifts do I need to do that are going to help me perform? Whereas men are probably given the opposite. You need to eat more, you need to lift more. And it's no wonder that such a high percentage of women athletes are not struggle with eating disorders.
And I think it's gotten better since when we were in college where this idea of thinness was so at the center, but it's obviously still there. I mean, the numbers are saying that it's still there.
The sport you're a part of also plays a huge part. Runners, I would imagine, struggle with this a little more. Dancers, I would imagine, struggle with this a little more. So I think the type of sport you're playing also plays a factor of who's experiencing this at higher rates. But it definitely happens to all athletes. I'm just thinking, I think more sports probably it impacts their athletes a little more than others.
The other unfortunate part is that college athletes are 2.5 times more likely to encounter sexual abuse than their peers who don't play sports. 2.5 times more likely.
Did not know that at all.
According to a 2021 survey, and this is all athletes, not just female athletes, so all college athletes are 2.5 times more likely. The survey revealed that male coaches and professors were commonly identified as abusers, and 37% of survivors didn't report the abuse because they were afraid of losing their scholarship. It's a hard, sad world. And because money's involved and because your livelihood is involved, and even after watching Full Court Press, there's so much more for some of these student athletes than just themselves and their sport. They're thinking about their families. They're thinking about longevity. They're thinking about how do they get into the pros so that they can support not only themselves, but their family around them. I understand why you don't report because it's not the easiest environment to report in either because you might not be believed. Let's talk about the role of social media in this. There definitely needs to be more studies, but I wanted to point out some interesting data that has been found. A recent study of 112 NBA members found that late night tweeting resulted in making shots at a lower rate.
What?
1.7 percentage points less.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
See, and it could be the time of night that they're
Right,
tweeting
they're
like they're
just
not
like-
getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
Or the fact that they're engaging with trolls, which is never a good
Yep.
idea. You're not going to score as many points.
Wow.
I just thought that was a crazy stat. Female athletes disproportionately suffer from the negative effects of body image portrayed through social media. A study found on the results of 108 women interacting with social media, women who were exposed to images on Instagram with the hashtag Fitspiration had higher levels of body dissatisfaction and negative mood.
We didn't have as much social media growing up, but there was always like fitness magazines that I was surrounded by. And I think that was my source of dissatisfaction and higher levels of negative mood. So I can't imagine that being in my hands at all time, because how often are we on our phone just scrolling through social media and then that's all you're seeing?
Yeah. And I remember after college when my own relationship with my body image was really, really low.
Yeah.
I had to unfollow a ton of people, and not because I don't love them, but because seeing their physical bodies, like I remember unfollowing Khloe Kardashian because I was like, I can't see this. It just was not helpful for me. And so that was something that I had to do in order to take care of myself, was just like unfollow a ton of people who just weren't helping me with how I viewed myself. Multiple studies also show that increased social media use among girls can lead to depression, reduced sleep, lower self-esteem, and body image issues. So being aware of your time on social media is really important. And I still think about my time on social media. You know that I like to spend a lot of time on social media, but I do make sure that I'm making sure that my algorithm is actually meeting my interests and is not feeding me things that is not going to be helpful for me.
Lucky for me, my personal algorithm is a lot of women's sports, even before our Women's Sports Weekly algorithm. So that problem hasn't been as relevant in my life lately. But it's important.
Your algorithm is women's sports
and puppies
and dogs up for adoption. Danielle keeps sending me dogs who are eligible for adoption. We already have one dog. We live in a small house, and I'm going to break, and we cannot have another dog. It would be too much. We travel too much, but she's going to break me with all of these cute puppies.
Thank you, Instagram.
So let's talk about what protects athletes. We talked about some of the risk factors, talked about some stats, what protects them. Resilience. So resilience is often referred to as grit, and it's your ability to continue and grow and perform in the face of hardship and triumph despite experiencing adversity. So I always think of resilience of your ability to bounce back. If you're too high or you're too low, how quickly can you come back to center? That for me is resilience. And this is a protective piece to mental health for athletes. So female athletes who reported more burnout symptoms demonstrated less resilience and were more likely than athletes without burnout symptoms to drop out from the sport. If you have burnout symptoms, your resilience is lower and you're more likely to drop out from the sport. So the lower the burnout, the higher you scored on your resilience.
Okay.
And then highly resilient individuals tend to use coping skills that are problem focused, such as seeking information and assistance with handling a stressful situation, rather than focusing on emotion focused coping behaviors. Emotion focused coping behaviors are like venting or disengagement. So individuals who can focus on seeking information or assistance on how to move through the stressful event are more resilient than those who, when a stressful event occurs, react with venting or disengaging from the problem, like acting like it's not there. Another protective piece is mindfulness. So when I think mindfulness, I think breathing exercises, meditation, acknowledging what you're feeling and sensing it without interpretation or judgment. I love all this because this is exactly what I talk about in yoga all the time. I talk about your ability to bounce back and knowing that your thoughts and feelings, although they're real in the sense that they come up, they're not always true, not always facts. They could not be reality. A 2014 study introduced a structured mindfulness meditation training to a Division I soccer team. And after 12 training sessions given over the course of 12 weeks, their participants reported an enhanced ability to accept and experience a different relationship with their emotions both on and off the field. And then a study with cyclists found a negative association between mindfulness and pain catastrophizing. So a negative association means the higher your mindfulness, the lower your pain catastrophizing is, and the lower your mindfulness, the higher your pain catastrophizing is.
So does that prevent athletes from maybe pushing it to that next level because they're worried about the pain that's going to come?
Yep.
Interesting.
Like, this is going to hurt.
So I don't know if I should do this.
Yes.
Okay.
And a positive correlation between mindfulness and mental toughness. So the more mindful you are, the more likely you are to be mentally tough. And then third and finally, sleeping habits. I think this is the hardest one to address, especially among female college athletes, because it just doesn't feel like there's enough time in the day to do everything from practice to class to studying to lifting to eating to having any kind of social life at all. I just feel like sleep is really hard, and I feel like it's one of the most important ones.
My sleeping habits in college, terrible.
Yeah. How many all-nighters do you think you did in college?
Mostly freshman year, and then I figured it out. Like,
but like
I can't
over
sustain
10?
this. Ooh, that seems high, but I don't know. Maybe I spent a lot of time awake. I would sleep a lot during the day, but very unhealthy. I think I was nocturnal in college.
Yeah.
At least freshman year.
I have a witching hour where
I know it.
my body just shuts down. I could not stay up all night if I tried.
Well, now I can't. I finally figured out how to sleep like a human, but in college, I was not doing that.
But even in college, I would fall asleep with my textbook on my face and be like, I think the words are just going to fall into my head, and that's going to be my studying strategy because there's just no stopping me falling asleep.
Yeah, I kind of envy that because high school and college, not good. But I figured it out eventually.
Sleep both enhances athletic performance and is protective against sports-related injury, which to me is like, everyone should be prioritizing their sleep because if it can prevent you from getting
Recovery
an injury
time.
But there's so many things that go against that. Like if with these new conferences that are happening in college sports, they're going to be traveling across the country multiple times. That's going to affect your sleep when you're changing time zones.
Yes.
I just feel for the athletes, and I hope that someone's studying this of this amount of travel time and this change in time zones. Is it hurting our athletes?
We know how it is now. When we travel back east, it hurts.
And I'm just trying to go for a 3-mile run.
Right. It hurts. So that's a great point.
In 2018, a study investigated sleeping habits of 26 elite female gymnasts, and it reported relationships between decreased total sleep time and inferior athletic performance. In a study of cross-country athletes, it reported that poor sleep quality was likely to increase both new injury risk and exacerbation of existing injuries. So you got to sleep. These are things that are definitely going to be protective to you and your mental health. I want to talk a little bit about our own experiences with mental health in college. And I think for myself, if I could change one thing about my college experience, it would be my mental health. I'm not sure if it was due to my age or just not knowing enough. Like I feel like I was immature, but I wish I did more things to build my resilience. I think when we were talking about like problem-based coping and emotion-based coping, I was very big on emotion-based coping. I would either vent to a friend or I would totally disengage and just pretend like it wasn't happening. And I wasn't focused on what can I do to actually make my situation better. And I think I would have saved myself a lot of pain. But when I say that, I'm also like, I needed to have that in order to learn and be on this journey that I was on. So it's so hard.
I think to your point of, is it a maturity thing? I think yes, to a point.
Yeah.
Because to the point you just made, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes unfortunately, you have to go through some downs to find your way up. And it's not great. And I'm sure, like you said, you wish it was different, but maybe it's helped you become who you are now.
I don't think at the time I knew my mental health was bad. I knew I had anxiety. Like I had talked about anxiety with my therapist in high school, but I don't think I fully understood how my anxiety was affecting my performance. I couldn't make that connection. Now looking back, I could, and this has always been a problem for me. When I'm in it, I can't really see it. But when I'm able to look back, I'm like, oh, that's what was happening. And so now my work is like, how do I notice it faster? And that's part of resilience, right? Like your ability to bounce back. Because if I can notice it faster, then I'm going to be able to recover faster. The other piece of it is I walked on at South Carolina. I felt like I was lucky to even be there. So I just didn't want to be a problem. I didn't want to talk about my mental health. I felt so lucky to even be in the position I was in. I was just like, I'm just going to deal with this internally. I'm going to do what I need to do because I do not want to be seen as the problem child on this team.
That had to be really hard.
And I just think mental health is something that everyone needs to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's just not talked about enough. Luckily for me, I went to our sports psychologist. We had one.
That's great.
Shout out Dr. Cusack, the best sports psychologist in the world. Made me want to be a sports psychologist. Obviously, I'm not. But I also just need to shout out my parents who have always been so supportive of me going to therapy and seeing that therapy was actually really good for me. So I was comfortable enough to reach out to her. But I know that a lot of people aren't, and a lot of people are worried. I've heard stories before of they're worried that the sports psychologist is going to tell their coach what's going on, share information, that it's going to affect their playing time. Like, it is a real fear. And sometimes it happens.
Yeah, I'm sure it does happen in some cases, which is not right. And it is very unfortunate.
For me, there was just so many things that I was dealing with in college. I came out in college. I was transitioning from a kid to an adult. I was navigating my relationship with my parents from kid to adult. I was planning for my future. That most of my sessions with the sports psychologist were not focused on the sport. They were actually focused on my life. But I do think that in order to even have gotten to the performance side, we had to work through all of those hurdles. So I don't ever think that my mental health was at its peak or that it was helping my performance in any way. I think I was at the very beginning stages of beginning to take care of myself and what that looked like. How was your mental health for you?
I'm laughing because my mental health college.
Hold on. Have you seen that meme? Or it's some video on Instagram lately where it's like a millennial woman talking about their mental health. And in order to make it palatable for the person she's talking to, she just does weird voices. So the person's like, hey, how are you doing? And she's like, oh my God, I'm so great. You know, I just feel like I'm going to kill myself, but it's really okay.
Yep. No, definitely not going to do that. I just look back at high school and college and I'm like, oof. It was a little rough there for a few years. I definitely struggled throughout high school and college. I think high school, there were things happening that weren't necessarily related to the sports I was playing, but
it never
impacted everything that had to do with sports.
Yeah.
And at the time, I just put so much pressure on myself to perform well because the sport I was playing, like high school, I played 3 sports, and whatever season I was in, that was the most important thing to me at that time. Wanted to perform well, wanted to be the best, wanted to do my best. And sometimes I think that added pressure kind of took away some of the joy of the game, unfortunately, especially, and not to say, I mean, I loved every second, but there were times where it was less fun just because of the pressure I was putting on myself, especially basketball in high school, because that was my main sport. I knew I wanted to play that in college. So I just wish I was able to talk about it more openly with someone because I don't think I understood what was happening inside my head and how to help myself, basically. So definitely throughout high school, I think the transition to college was really difficult because coming from high school, had 11 varsity letters, was starting on all my teams, and freshman year of college basketball, I rode the bench for a full year. And there were a lot of times where I thought I should be playing over certain people. And I definitely, to the one point you were mentioning of how I handled the situation, I definitely talked about it to people and vented about it, which looking back, I wish I didn't do things the way I did sometimes.
But you need to talk to someone about it too. It's hard because you do need to talk about it. And it's like at the end of the day, what was the solution then? Was the solution like, I'm just going to talk about it and just vent? Or was the solution like, I'm going to talk about it and then here's how I'm going to address the issue? And that's where I feel like I was missing. I wasn't like, and here's how I'm going to address the issue.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think my way of addressing the issue was like, what can I do to make myself better? So I need to be put in, and eventually that helped me. But I think it was just a really hard struggle to transition to not playing and not being the best on the team and things like that. So I would say that was hard. Sophomore year didn't start, but definitely started playing a lot more minutes. And then junior and senior year, I started, but junior year, I struggled so much.
With your mental health.
Yes. I I lacked confidence. So even though I was starting, I spent that whole season wondering when the starting position was going to be taken away from me. I don't think I enjoyed a single moment of my junior basketball season because I was just worried it was too good to be true.
Yeah.
I was not fortunate enough to have a sports psychologist. I was not fortunate enough to go to therapy in high school. Like, I wish I went as a kid and in high school. I think I would have been able to recognize certain things so much earlier, and I didn't start going to therapy, as you know, until I was an adult. Now I know I have OCD, which I don't talk about a ton with a lot of people. You know, I struggle with it, and OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. And I don't necessarily so much struggle with the compulsive part, but the obsessive thoughts.
Yeah,
so
and they're intrusive.
My entire junior season, I obsessed over this idea that I was not good enough. So-and-so was going to take my spot. The coaches were talking about me behind my back. This is sick, but every time the coaches would be at the center of the court before practice when we were stretching, talking, I thought they were saying something negative about me.
Like they were just going to take
that's
you
sick.
off.
And I could
you were
not
sick.
get out of it.
Yeah.
And looking back, I'm like, oh my God, Danielle, why?
I know.
Like, it's
but
just
you can't
crazy.
don't beat yourself up on top of it. You know?
Yeah, no, but now I can say, oh, those were intrusive obsessive thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, I really struggled with anxiety. I don't think I understood what anxiety was in college.
Yeah. And now you have tools in your toolbox, right?
But I don't think I knew those terms. Luckily, senior year, I had a lot more confidence, but junior year, I wish someone could have just like shaken me and been like,
I know.
You are here because we believe you're supposed to be here, but you need to believe that.
Yeah.
I just wanted someone to tell me you are here for a reason.
Yep.
And I don't know if I ever necessarily got that. It's to no one's fault. It's just like looking back, I can say that's what I needed in that moment.
Well, yeah. And there is a point where the coaching staff is there to coach you, right? And are they equipped for mental health issues? I mean, they're equipped enough to know about your physical performance and all of that. So why aren't we equipping our coaches more to be aware anytime you have a freshman come in and they are at the top of their game in high school and then they're riding the bench, that's going to affect a person no matter what.
Yep.
So how are we equipping our coaches to do that? And maybe it's not equipping the coaches. Like maybe we're asking our coaches to do too much, but then how are you getting the support staff in there that can have those conversations, right?
And luckily when I was coaching at Moravian, eventually a sports psychologist did come in, and I just remember thinking, wow, that would have been very helpful for me. Luckily senior year, I had more confidence, was able to enjoy it more, but it's sad looking back that it took me basically 4 years to get to that point where I could enjoy again, enjoy it. And I think other things that you didn't mention that I'm sure cause a lot of extra anxiety in current players is the drinking culture in college. Is
That's a good point.
There's a lot of drinking happening, and I did a lot more drinking than I wish I did.
Yeah. And it's a coping mechanism.
And looking back, and I'm like, drinking causes more anxiety. Drinking increases your lack of sleep. Like your ability to sleep when you drink is terrible. That definitely played a role on my mental health as well. Like the amount of alcohol that was being consumed. And
it's a depressant.
Yeah. And I followed the rules in terms of when you could drink. We had 48-hour rule, whatever. Like I was never drinking when I shouldn't be, quote unquote, in terms of basketball. If I'm heavily drinking on a Saturday night and then I have to be back performing high on practice on Monday, and it wasn't just me, a lot of people in college, but I look back, I'm like, why? Yeah. And I think I wish I could have done it more responsibly back then, the way I've learned
it's so
to do
hard
it.
though, because you have to do it bad in order to figure out what your edge is, right? It's just, this is where I struggle, because part of growing up is finding out what works and what doesn't. And you can't have your parents just protect you from everything. You have to fail and figure it out. Like you said, it took you almost 4 years to figure out. So I guess what I would want is just people to figure it out faster.
Yeah.
Right?
And have more resources available. And this is similar to having a class to prepare athletes from college to real life. Why don't we have a class for college athletes in the beginning of their career to say, you want to perform well, this is how you need to feed your body and mind. This is the sleep you need to get in order to perform well. Really just go through things that aren't being talked about, real life scenarios.
Yeah. And that's what I want to get into next. Like, what do we do about this? And I think that's a great point. And it's like, how do we create spaces in athletics where we're prioritizing resilience, mindfulness, sleep habits, healthy connections with your mind and body? I mean, all of those are so important. And I think the first step is to talk about it, to normalize it, especially in college. Why are we not providing resources and even mandating sports psychology. If you are lifting, if you are training, and that's you as a student athlete, you are required to do that. Why are you not also required to go check in with a sports psychologist? And it could be packaged as it's a way to help you with your performance. But I guarantee you there will be people walking in there like me who don't need to talk about their performance, but need to talk about everything else going on in their life so that then they could focus on their performance. Like, why are we not creating an environment? And I know not every college has the funds and resources to pay for a sports psychologist or enough sports psychologists. If you have to train, if you have to do certain things, why do you not also have to take care of your mental health? I don't understand it.
I think it just needs to be talked about more. I think there's such a stigma around it still, and I think we're getting to a better place, but it's still not enough.
And you mentioned this too, but I think what would be really helpful for me is if someone talked about their story with anxiety, with depression, with X, Y, and Z, because I feel like if I heard it through another lens, I would have been like, oh, that's also me.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to identify it when I was in it. But I feel like if I heard someone saying, this was my experience in college, these are some things that may happen to you, this is what it's called. If you're experiencing this, you definitely need to go talk to someone. That would have been so helpful for me.
Yeah. It's almost like instead of having someone come in and explain why college was so great and their time was so great, it's like being real with someone and saying, and this is what I struggled with.
Yeah,
that's
we
really
used
good
to have
point.
alumni come in all the time and just tell us how, like, don't miss this moment. You're gonna miss it one day. I'm an old person now. They were probably like our age now, but like, you just love every moment of it. And in my head, I was like, love every moment of it. I'm just stressed.
Yeah, like that's not realistic.
Exactly.
It's easy to say you should be grateful. I wish I could take it back, but it's also acknowledging that it's also really hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And I do want to point out that there are strong, elite, high-performing athletes who struggle with their mental health. So just to name a few, Naomi Osaka plays tennis. She was fined $15,000 for missing a press conference before dropping out of the French Open. And the reason why she dropped out was because of her anxiety and depression. So she had to pay a fine for it, but she said, I'm going to prioritize my mental health and I'm going to drop. Serena Williams has shared her struggles with postpartum depression. Allie Raceman, gymnast, has talked about her anxiety, especially after experiencing sexual abuse. She's a mental health advocate now. Simone Biles, gymnast, famously withdrew from 5 event finals at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. She was citing the twisties, which is when you have a mental block that you are losing track of where you are when you're in the air, which is the most scary thing I've ever heard. And she also said that she needed to prioritize her mental health.
And what happened to her? People killed her on the internet.
Oh, I know.
For that.
Killed her.
Really just went at her. And it's like, no wonder why people are afraid to speak about it, because you do. And people are like, whatever, I won't even
She's
get
a bad
into that.
teammate.
But it's just amazing how people justify that they can go at someone for prioritizing their mental health.
And if she broke her foot, we wouldn't be saying anything.
Right.
We'd be like, she can't compete. She broke her foot.
And I'll talk about Alexi Pappas again, that I mentioned before. In her book, Bravey, she talks about how she struggled with severe depression before. And it took her a while to realize that, just like anything else, just because you can't see the damage on your brain, let's say, it's like a broken bone. That bone, your brain needs to be mended, and you need to take the time to do that. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't realize that. But
I just truly believe that everyone struggles with their mental health to some degree at one point or another. And just like everything else, mental health, your mental health ebbs and flows. And we can pretend that it doesn't, or we can actually start addressing the issue and providing people with the resources that they need. Everyone has mental health. Why are we not providing resources to address something that everyone has?
How would you say you take care of your mental health as an adult post-college?
Oh my gosh. It looks totally different. I used to not rest. I thought rest was for weak people. I just thought that rest wasn't an option. And so I would go hard every day with a physical workout. And I thought when I was resting that it was a bad thing, that I was being lazy. So now I prioritize rest just as much as I prioritize my workouts. The mindfulness piece, I'm like, I wish someone gave me one breathing exercise while I was in college. Every time I do one simple breathing exercise, inhale for a count of 4, hold my breath for 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold empty for 4. I feel different after every time. I really think my whole approach of taking care of myself and understanding that a body needs rest has been really, really important. I also think my relationship with food has changed in such an important way where I'm not constantly looking at calories and saying I need to work this off now every time I eat, which is what I used to do.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I'm eating to fuel my body because my body needs fuel. It has changed the way I interact with food in such a enormous way. And I really do think that some of it has to do with age. Like I've just matured over the years as well. What about you?
Those are all really great points. I think I've talked about my sleep schedule in college was terrible. I am on a great sleep schedule now. Rest days, definitely important. The food thing is a big one for me. I follow running podcasts, a lot of accounts, read books because it's just what I like to do now. And that's how I'm competitive with myself. And carbs. For how long, how much of my life did I spend thinking that carbs were bad for you?
I know.
It's sick.
I know.
Now I eat so many carbs, and that doesn't mean I'm binge eating donuts or whatever every day. I just
Although I do love a donut.
Yeah, but it's just I look at food so differently,
Yeah.
and I know I need those carbs if I'm going to go for a long run, and that's going to fuel me. Personally, I remember thinking I should be running to lose weight.
Yeah.
Like I think I started probably running to lose weight, and now I run because I actually enjoy it, and I eat so much more, and I know I'm not doing it to lose weight.
Yeah.
I finally gotten to this point where that has helped me so much mentally from a food aspect, just in general.
Yep.
I think all those things play into it, but you mentioned mindfulness. Luckily, I get to go to yoga. You teach. I've learned a lot through you, and I go to therapy and things like that. And the mental aspect, all those things just play a huge role and have helped me. I just wish I had all this knowledge when I was playing in college, but you live and you learn.
One, I want to say thank you for sharing about your mental health.
You too. It's important.
Yeah. And I also just want to underscore that if you have the ability to go to therapy for me has given me tools in my toolbox. It hasn't fixed everything, but it gives me tools in my toolbox that I can access when I need them. It gives me a place to vent, and then also gives me the tools that I need to be problem focused rather than emotionally coping focused. Anytime that I'm going through a transition, I know that I need to get back into therapy. I always thought that I was going to graduate therapy one day. I know that it's just not the case, and I'm going to ebb and flow and return and feel okay for a bit and know that I'm going to return one day, and that's totally okay.
I just think it's important to at least look into it if you think it could help you, but you have to be ready to take that next step. And I know that was a really hard step for me as an adult, a really hard step. And I'm happy I ended up taking the step a few years ago. I personally know how challenging it could be, and picking up the phone is sometimes the hardest part.
Yeah. One more thing about therapists. If you go to one and you don't like them, you can go to someone else. You can always find a therapist that works best for you. So don't count it out if you go to one therapist. And
that's such a good point, because I've been to there's many times I went to one therapist, had a bad session, and then didn't go back for years. Yeah. That's such a good point.
Let's wrap up with our mental health piece today. We need to recognize that players are more than players, and that if you want to get the most out of your student athletes, if you want to get the most out of your life, you need to have a focus on mental health. If we're prioritizing physical injury, then we should be prioritizing mental injury at the same level.
And just a disclaimer, we are not medical professionals. We're not experts in this field. It's just more so things we've learned through research and our personal experiences. So just want to caveat that as well.
Take it with a grain of salt. Take what you like and leave the rest.
Correct.
All right, let's get into what we're looking forward to this week.
Yes. What do you have for us, Carolyn?
When we release this episode, it will be the start of the WNBA season. Woo! So the May 13th, so Monday, is the final roster cut down date. I know.
I hate to see all the waves.
I know.
Ugh.
They've been coming. So hopefully there's not too many surprises. But then May 14th, the regular season begins. We kick off with the Washington Mystics versus New York Liberty at 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN and WNBA League Pass. As we mentioned last week, WNBA League Pass is $35 for the year. You can get a student pass for $20 a year.
Can I just pause real quick? I want to tell people my favorite part of League Pass.
Tell me.
We've been watching the preseason games, and instead of commercials, you get live access into what's happening in the game. So People dancing in the stands on the Jumbotron, prizes throughout the game. So League Pass, so much fun.
It is fun. I mean, when I go to a live game, watching people when they see themselves on the Jumbotron and how they react is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, so now we get to do it from our living room couch.
What are you looking forward to this week?
Once again, I am going to cover women's lacrosse. The tournament has officially kicked off and the second round is taking place as we speak. Quarterfinals will take place on Thursday, May 16th. And there will be 4 games. Times and teams are still to be determined because at the time of recording, games are still happening. Please check ESPN.
May Madness, we continue.
Yes. That's it for this week. We will see you next week on Women's Sports Weekly. In the meantime, watch women's sports, rate and subscribe to the pod on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Share the podcast with your friends. Keep sending us topics you want us to cover on Instagram at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
See you next Tuesday.